So Bernie's plans for climate change, and we're definitely not going to go through the entirety of Bernie's plan word for word, because let me show you here. The policy on Bernie's website is almost 14,000 words long. So it would take quite a while for us to go through all of this, but that's what I'm talking about. Like, look, I'll just scroll down so you can see. Look how long this is. I'm about halfway through and I feel like I've been scrolling forever. This is the most comprehensive policy out there on climate change. It goes much further than anyone else, much, much further. So I show you the length of that and the extensiveness of that to drive the point home that Elizabeth Warren isn't the only policy candidate. Bernie has these policies. His branding is different than Elizabeth Warren's, and that's totally normal in a campaign. But it is fascinating to me that the media has grabbed hold of this branding of Elizabeth Warren's so firmly, even though the facts show that it's Mr. Bernie Sanders who has a plan for that and has the policies for that. The Huffington Post has actually done a fairly thorough write-up of what this means, of what this plan that Bernie Sanders has unveiled means. So we'll go through this. Bernie Sanders unveils $16 trillion Green New Deal to combat climate crisis. This is by Alexander C. Kaufman, again in HuffPo. The 2020 Democratic candidate's climate plan offers a detailed vision that would expand public ownership of utilities and make electricity virtually free by 2035. Democratic presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders released a sweeping $16.3 trillion climate plan on Thursday, vowing to create 20 million jobs and completely zero out planet heating emissions by 2050. The proposal outlines easily the most ambitious vision for a Green New Deal to date, with calls to massively expand public ownership of everything from power generation to groceries. With Washington Governor Jay Inslee ending his climate-centered bid for the Democratic nomination a day earlier, the plan vaults the Vermont senator ahead of his 2020 rivals on what's emerging as the defining policy issue of the Democratic primary. So I have to give the HuffPo some props here, because they are saying, yes, this one goes much further. It is the most detailed. So props to them for not pretending that it's not, because that's just the facts. At a moment when record wildfires are raging from the Amazon to the Arctic, and Greenland is losing up to 12.5 billion tons of ice in a single day, and again, check out Jordan's reporting from yesterday about the Amazon, the plan is dense with detail and frank in its goals. Where other proposals, including those from Inslee and Senator Elizabeth Warren, depict expanded regulatory regimes and public spending aimed at spurring private investment, Sanders charts out a path to a hospitable global climate through Nordic-style democracy. So they are mentioning that Elizabeth Warren has an expansive plan, but that Bernie's, again, goes to another level here. The scope of the challenge ahead of us shares some similarities with the crisis faced by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1940s. And it has to be said, like, Bernie is invoking FDR in his, talking about branding, because some of our best loved policies were FDR policies. He's kind of branding himself, like latching on to FDR a bit. I noticed that when I went to his event in DC where he was talking about Medicare for all, his speechwriters and policy people are latching onto that FDR title, which I think is pretty interesting to note. That goes on to say, as president, Bernie Sanders will boldly embrace the moral imperative of addressing the climate crisis. The plan opens with Sanders vowing to slash U.S. emissions 71% below 2017 levels by 2030 with 100% renewable electricity and zero emissions vehicles. He declares war on the fossil fuel industry with proposed bans on fracking, drilling on public lands, and all imports and exports of oil and gas, and threatens companies with civil and criminal charges for pollution and obstructing climate action. He pledges $200 billion to help developing countries reduce their own climate pollution by 36% in the next decade. Citing the nuclear disasters in Chernobyl and Fukushima, Sanders, long a critic of nuclear power, swears off new reactors and promises a moratorium on future licenses to existing plants. His plan rules out geoengineering the climate or deploying technologies to capture carbon dioxide from fossil fuel plants, which he derided as false solutions. Generous pledges for workers animate Sanders' proposal. The plan, which comes at the same week the campaign released its proposal to boost unions, promises 5 years of unemployment insurance, a wage guarantee, housing assistance, job training, pension support, and priority job placement for all its workers displaced by the transition. So we're getting a lot of talk here, not only about the climate and about the huge crisis, but they are also talking about the people and how everyday people are affected by climate change, but also the fact that this country needs jobs. And yes, when we talk about climate change, we are talking about eliminating a lot of jobs that Americans have come to depend on. And so there's a lot of fear out there. So the Sanders campaign, I believe, is going to focus on the fact that this plan creates a lot of jobs. It moves us into the future. It doesn't devastate the economy because of the new jobs it creates and the fact that it is a shift in the types of jobs people will have. So they aren't, the media is going to try to scare people by saying, oh, they're going to get rid of all the jobs and people are really going to have a hard time earning an income. They're getting rid of entire industries. But the Sanders campaign is pointing out rightly that new jobs will be created, and we are simply moving into the future in order to save our planet. So they're focusing both on the planet, the crises going on all across our planet, but along with the people. And I think that's a very smart it's not just a technique, it's the truth and it's their honest policy. But marketing wise, talking about marketing these things, they have to focus on people because people are worried about themselves. They're worried about their lives. They're worried about their jobs, their family. So they are focusing on that in this policy specifically, which I think is a very smart move. What stands out first is Sanders' clear answer to the perennial question of how to pay for it. There's the money saved, $1.215 trillion from scaling back military spending on protecting global oil, and $1.31 trillion from federal and state welfare due to the creation of millions of good-paying unionized jobs. Then they talk about the money earned. I won't go through all of that money. We'll link to the article. Those pushing a Green New Deal, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the grassroots group Sunrise Movement, have shied away from talking numbers, even as Republicans, and this is to be expected and it will continue happening, especially if there is a President Sanders, the Republicans will mount an all-out war against this plan. Republicans fabricated a bogus $93 trillion price tag. Instead, advocates have pointed to the cost of sticking to business as usual. This plan will pay for itself over 15 years, the policy memo reads. Experts have scored the plan and its economic effects. Let's see. We don't need to read this whole thing. Where Sanders' plan diverges most from those of Warren, Inslee, and others is in its explicit calls for scaling the public sector in ways unseen since the 1940s. Power marketing administrations seldom discuss agencies under the Energy Department that operate transmission lines and sell electricity generated at federally owned hydro dams are central to the plan. The federal government built 4 such regional administrations between 1937 and 1977. Sanders calls for building a 5th to cover the states and territories currently outside the other 4's jurisdiction. He earmarks $1.52 trillion to convert the entire operations to wind, solar, and geothermal, and an additional $852 billion to build energy storage capacity. The plan even offers $14.7 billion in federal investments in cooperatively owned grocery stores. Local groceries and co-ops are more likely to buy local products, which will help grow markets for farmers to sell their goods, the plan reads. We will also use these funds to bring grocery stores to food deserts, ensuring all people have access to healthy local food. So once again, not only is Bernie addressing the terrible climate crisis, he's also addressing food deserts. And the fact his policy is so in depth that it addresses every single facet of the climate crisis, but how climate is intertwined with literally everything in our daily lives. So from food deserts to people's jobs, this plan goes in depth into how everything will be affected, how everything will change for the better, according to the plan. Moving on down here. It's easy to imagine the political right smearing the proposal as a Soviet-style takeover by an avowed democratic socialist. In reality, the plan leans more toward the first half of Sanders' self-professed ideological bent rather than the latter. The proposal redirects subsidies and incentives heaped on big businesses to small ones and invests $31 billion in local food plants, including slaughterhouses and dairy processors. The plan provides nearly $3 trillion in grants to lower-income families and small businesses to trade in combustion engine vehicles for all-electric alternatives. It offers tax credits to businesses that hire workers transitioning out of fossil fuel jobs. Nearly $2.2 trillion is budgeted for grants to homeowners and small businesses to weatherize buildings. And again, we don't need to get into all the dollars and cents. I can drop the link. We need a president who has the courage, vision, and the record to face down the greed of fossil fuel executives and the billionaire class who stand in the way of climate action, the memo reads. We need a president who welcomes their hatred. Bernie will lead our country to enact the Green New Deal and bring the world together to defeat the existential threat of climate change. And I want to drive home again that very, very quick summary that we just did based on the HuffPo doesn't even come close to touching everything that this plan covers. Transform our energy system to 100% renewable energy and create 20 million jobs. And what I'm reading right now is right on Bernie's website under the Green New Deal. He named it the Green New Deal. Scrolling down. As I said, it takes a while to scroll here, because it is end the greed of the fossil fuel industry and hold them accountable. Rebuild our economy and ensure justice for frontline communities and a just transition for workers. Yeah, there's a lot here. I definitely urge you to read it. I'm going to reread it even more in depth. I think it's important that the media in particular doesn't gloss over the fact that Bernie Sanders has these very extensive, very thorough plans in favor of the marketing from a candidate that says she has these very thorough and in-depth plans. Elizabeth Warren absolutely has a lot of plans. She is good on, well, saying she's good on policy, I mean she's thorough in policy. I don't, whether you think she's good on policy is definitely a personal decision. But Bernie Sanders goes further, and the media glosses over that. The media glosses over Bernie in general in favor of talking about Biden and Warren. So the truth is, Bernie is coming out with plans left and right. They are updated versions. They are based on science and research and the latest information that he has, but he has also been consistent, as you saw in that clip from 1987 when Bernie was talking climate change with middle schoolers. And that, I don't remember exactly when she changed over, but that might have been back when Elizabeth Warren was a Republican. I'm not sure. So whether you like Elizabeth Warren or not, the fact is that Bernie has these policies. Bernie deserves his policies to be talked about just as much as other candidates' policies are talked about.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.